So, welcome everyone to the Modern CFO show, where we sit down with some of the best and brightest minds in finance to share their experiences and their lessons learned. And today, with me is a great pleasure. We have Cornelis von Mollendorff, the CFO and COO from TP Bennett. Cornelis, thank you for joining me on the show. Can you kindly just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your experiences and what it is that you do currently at TP Bennett?
Sure. Uh, Thanks for having me as well, Zach. I'm the CFO, COO of TP Bennett. I'm also a board member. TP Bennett is a multi-award winning architecture and interior design company. So my role is largely alongside the CCO is to lead the performance and the strategy of the business more beyond the design side of it. So overseeing the finance department, operations, people and culture team, technology, property and governance. So the focus is largely to ensure that the infrastructure of the practice is as robust and forward-thinking as the creative work that we do as a business as well. Since joining TP Bennett in 2016 as financial controller, my role has grown in the business as the business has grown as well. So we've seen a period of expansion during that time and also an international growth as well on top of that. So as part of that process, you would have seen my role evolved as part of it. So as we've grown, we now work in more complex environments. We work in over 30 countries when it comes to projects. And that complexity requires a different type of foundations and governance. So looking at our regional leadership teams, what is needed for them, clear data-driven performance metrics, and then creating those infrastructures in the back end to make sure as a business that we have a clear and I would say precise way of measuring information across different jurisdictions. So just a little bit more about myself. I worked in the architecture and design space for the last 20 years. Prior to joining TP Bennett, I worked for a firm called WATG, which again, they focus on master planning, architecture and interior design, where I was head of finance for EMEA, looking after their finance operations, but again, in a multi-country environment company, again, complex, and therefore there's a lot of interesting nuances around that. And that's one of the reasons I've stuck within the design space as well. I really enjoy the nuances of design, working with creative people, and then obviously bringing that story to life. So in a high level, my role is very much about building the platforms to allow that sustainable growth, ensuring that as a business that we remain creative, we are commercially disciplined, but also we hold our culture and who we are as a business. So growth doesn't only come down to the structure itself, but it for me is all about the culture and how we evolve the culture and the structure together.
Exactly that, and thank you for that explanation. I mean, obviously, TP Bennett is a very, very large company, and we've got so much to talk about in terms of the growth in your role, and also some of the amazing things that you guys are doing internationally. So, just to kick things off, I think the CFO role itself, and I'm sure you probably agree, has adapted and changed a lot over the years. Where, of course, it's not just about the numbers, right? But I want to know how important are the more, I call them softer factors that make up a great CFO. So we're talking things such as, team leadership, the mentoring side, the personal planning. How important are those sides of the role, and how have those impacted your career so far?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And also, I think the CFO role has probably moved beyond the numbers for quite some time. But I do feel that the soft factors is not just a side conversation or something that's a nice to have. It's core to what we have to be as CFOs. And I would probably see that more as probably a strategic skill rather than a soft skill moving forward. And especially in creative businesses, if you think about working with creatives, what will actually move those individuals? It's not the numbers itself. Working with architects, interior designers, it's all about the vision and the impact that their work makes on the environment. So as part of a CFO's role, it's very much translating that financial data and telling a story around that, how that actually supports decision making. And for me, the soft factors, obviously, like you mentioned, leadership, mentoring, and personal development, they've been critical to my own career. So when I stepped into senior roles, it became clear that the way to influence is not just through your technical expertise alone, but it's very much built on trust, relationships, your emotional intelligence around that, knowing when to challenge, when to listen, but also when to step back. We actually worked with a business coach for the last 3 to 4 years, and one of my colleagues, I'm going to say, coined a phrase. It was connection creates commitment. And that really sums it up for me. When people feel that they are connected and trusted, they commit fully to the project, to the task you give them, but they also feel part of the journey that we're on as a business, and therefore it drives performance. And you can see that in the impact of our own business, right? When I started out as FD a number of years ago, before I became CFO, we were a £30 million business. We're now probably looking to close the year on a £60 million business with 500 people. That obviously takes structure requirements and governance played a role in that. But it was just as much about our culture, the strength of our leadership team, the people feeling really that they have ownership of that journey and help them drive the company towards that journey as well. So I think all those things together, the softer factors, isn't just a nice to have anymore. They've been fundamental to my career journey, but also to the success of our business. And a modern CFO, for me, it's not just the guardian of capital, looking after the finances and reporting on financial numbers. They're the co-architect of a company's future. So shaping the culture and the direction of that business.
Yeah, I think it's a really important one, right? Because it's not just about, reporting figures to the board. It's very much about being present with the team. And like I said, those softer factors have probably impacted your career, leading from financial controller to then FD to then CFO. So without someone there, mentoring you, you can see the journey of that you've gone through yourself, and it's also about giving back. So I think it's like you said, you hit the nail on the head how important it is that it's a must have for the whole team, right?
100% agree.
And is there a specific moment that you can kindly share where maybe some of those softer skills have made a real difference to an outcome? So whether it's, like you say, how you've gone from financial controller to CFO, how you've done that for someone in your own team in TP Bennett or a previous role. I don't know if you can share maybe an example or two.
Yeah, so obviously, like I said earlier, we worked with a business coach over the last 3 to 4 years. And even though I've had the technical expertise, I've obviously evolved in my role, it was still quite hard to evolve to that next level. Because it's something that we don't get trained to do, right? We're not trained to move into stepping away, thinking about how we land. For me, it was very important actually thinking about how do you land and how do you come across. And I think just stepping back every time rather than speaking up or trying to fill the room with conversations to almost come across like you know what you're talking about all the time. One of the mistakes people make, I actually came across it recently when we interviewed a couple of candidates. It was they're trying to explain as much as they can to come across that they know everything. And sometimes it's better to think about how do you land, how do you come across when you put something forward, and actually having that conversation and putting 2 or 3 things forward that actually has a bigger impact than just filling the room with loads of noise and loads of conversation to show that you know what you're talking about. So for me, it comes back to going and thinking about how do I land and how do I come across when I present or have conversations as well.
Yeah, there's a very interesting point, especially I'm thinking out loud, if you even going to go report to a board, what is it that you want to get across? And like you say, exactly in your words, how do you land? You don't just want to talk about 50 different topics to cover all grounds. You need to make sure that what you're talking about is effective and you get the right outcome. I was also going to ask, I think, look, when we're talking about leadership and working with large teams, obviously you've got a very extensive career in working with large teams, both locally and internationally, whether it be the US or Dubai, etc. I want to know from your perspective, what makes a great leader in business, and what should other CFOs in 2026 prioritize in their finance function to kind of drive the best out of a team?
Yeah. There's probably a number of layers in that one as well. So I'll probably break it down. For me, I think the first one, looking at the leadership side of that question, I think it's about consistency. And what I mean with that is you can't change depending on your mood or the pressure of the situation. People need to know what's expected of you and what you expect of them. So your mood or the pressure situation shouldn't come across or reflect in your decision making, especially in senior roles. If your judgment shifts under pressure, the confidence will drop pretty quickly. If it's a one-to-one conversation you're having with a partner or in a boardroom, if there's a lot of pressure and your decision making changes and you're not calm, considered, and steady, I do think that has an impact on the way you come across as a leader as well. But one of the key things that obviously working in large teams, and it probably started off of my career and even in school and sport, is I've always been a great believer in leading from the front and lead by example. So for me, it always comes back. I would never put my team in a position or in a situation where I wouldn't put myself in. So for me, if it's a tough audit or having a difficult conversation, or if it's a major system change, whatever the reason might be, I wouldn't put my team in there unless I would have done that myself. So sometimes what I'll do is I might be hands-on on certain occasions, not to take control, but more to demonstrate ownership and also to set the standard, to show that I lead by example and lead from the front. But one of the key things for me is a great thing about leadership. It all comes about, for me, it comes back to the fact that it's all about creating an environment where people can feel trusted and confident enough to make decisions and therefore stretch themselves. So for me, it's trust and confidence. So if you give people ownership, people will truly feel like they're going to be held accountable. They would raise their hand and they would actually step up and deliver, and they'll actually raise your expectations. And I've seen it a number of times. If you have the right team, you trust them, they have the confidence, and you give them the environment to perform, 9 times out of 10, they will exceed your expectations. And that is something that I've experienced a number of times. And for me, there's obviously 2 sides to that coin. It's also, if they don't succeed, is using that opportunity as a learning opportunity. It's not always, well, something went wrong, it's a blame game, it's your fault. It's very much saying, look, there was an opportunity here, didn't go according to plan. What can we learn from it? Because that will help you build relationships with your team members, but also it helps you develop that individual so they can move on to their career and become the next you, or even better. Because that's what we're all here for. We are trying to bring the next generation through as leaders. So for me, it's all about driving performance, but also bringing people through that will be the next me, like in the future. And the second part of your question was very much about the finance team itself. And to be honest, there's probably 3 things. When I look at the finance team itself and what drives a strong team for me, I think it's commercial, almost like the commerciality around it. The finance team has to understand how the business creates value. It's not reporting or things like that. For me, it's all about understanding the rhythm of the studios, the sectors, etc. So when something pauses or gets delayed, it's understanding what that impact is to the business and then advising the board on where we should be shifting direction or changing slightly our direction of where we go. And I think understanding the business is vital to being in finance these days, and it's not just reporting on the numbers. Secondly, and I think this is a very underrated skill and something I'm still working on when it comes to teams, but it's the art of listening. And I'm not saying just listen for listening's sake, but it's active listening. So it's making sure that you take into account what people are saying. And I've actually been to a conference recently, someone used this expression and it was great. It says you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. The ratio matters. So the more senior we get, the more we should listen and observe. And this is why I said earlier, and when you do have something to say, it has more of an impact when it's required rather than just filling that space. And then lastly for me would be talent development. We all work usually with large teams across different jurisdictions. It's vital that we develop the people coming through the business. And within our team, we've worked with that business coach for 3-4 years. We did Gallup strengths as well, which means we focus on what's right with people. We don't focus on what people's weaknesses are or areas they need to improve on. We look at them on what they're really good at, what they're strong at, and build a high performance team around that. So for us, looking at that model of developing people, having regular one-to-ones, creating a high-performance team, they don't happen by accident. They are done by intentionally working with those individuals. So ultimately, for me, I think CFOs or senior leaders within functions or finance functions, they have to build environments where people can thrive. And it's not just working with individuals, but creating that environment where people feel comfortable enough to push the boundaries, but also feel that they can thrive within it.
Yeah, Joe, you said some amazing things there, and these are all things that are kind of hitting home to me being in a small business where you're just starting to offload a lot of workload and hiring people, and you have to try and find people that are better than you doing those one-to-ones. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of leading from the front, right? Because I think when you're in this C-suite, your role is so important. Sometimes it can be very easy to lock yourself away in a room or not be seen focusing on very important tasks. But I think there's a very good balance between making sure that you're still active, making sure that you're getting in on, whether it's a month end close or something, just being active so your team can see you, so they don't just feel like you're giving orders from the back and you're there actually being present. I think it's probably a big mistake that some larger companies do, not by meaning to, but something just to kind of take away, basically. So definitely thank you for sharing that as well. I was going to also ask if there's, if you've noticed that there's kind of any other mistakes that you kind of see finance leaders make when managing teams. I know you've given some amazing points there, but just to see in your experience with all of the other businesses you've worked in, if there's any just small things that you see all of the time, these small mistakes that can add up that you think can be, that there could be an easier solution to.
Yeah. Yes, I'm probably going to bring it back to the team environment again. And it's something that I've been working on myself over the last couple of years as well. And it's more about, so the expression is bursting the balloon. So what I mean with that is you have a project and the team is working flat out and someone's taking a part of the project, they're responsible for it, and they're really excited about the actual direction they're going in. They come and see you as the senior leader or the finance CFO, and they're not 100% in the direction that you would like them to go. So rather than coaching them and steering them in a different direction for them to go away and come up with different ideas, you basically just you burst their balloon and go, no, I don't agree with that. Here's the answer. And you almost give them the answer at that point. So managing them rather than being a coach. And that's a lot of things that we do as managers. We're very good at obviously being trained of managing a team, making sure the work gets done, but at the same time as keeping people engaged throughout the process. It comes very much down to how do you keep them engaged? And if you're going to tell them what to do all the time and they're not using their own thinking process, they're not using their own excitement about ideas they're coming up with, and all you're doing is you guiding them with all the answers and telling them what to do, that's one of the most key things I see, that at the end of the day, is that light in someone's eye goes out very quickly if you have a manager that keeps telling the people what to do, rather than just saying, well, look, this is what we need to go, or like here's where we need to go. Can you go away and get us there? And then working with them to actually evolve the process to actually get to the end result. I think that's, for me, is a critical element to the engagement of a team.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I'm thinking about times in my career where I probably made that mistake. I'm sure we've all been there. I wouldn't say it is a form of micromanaging, I guess. And sometimes it comes from a good place. It doesn't always mean that, you're doing it for the sake of it. But I think you're 100% right. It's having that balance to give people the freedom to let them think, maybe find their own feet, and just steering them on the right direction rather than, hounding them every day that they may be doing things wrong. It's so important.
Yeah. So like, just to add to that, I would say 100% agree. And we all have it. So like within the coaching world, it's called the advice monster. So try to avoid that advice monster and coach the team to come to the solution, work with them rather than bring out your advice monster and telling them what to do.
That's it. I think sometimes we also project our own kind of insecurities sometimes as well when doing that. So I think it's definitely something to be kind of wary of, to make sure that we're all accountable for that. And I also wanted to ask, something a little bit different, but I think based on your experience is very important to ask. I think that there's a little bit of a pressure for kind of young finance stars to be in a trained practice first, whether they're working in a large accounting firm, one of the big four, it's always something to strive for early on in your career. But I think in your career, you took a little bit of a more, I'd say, hands-on route, if that's correct. And I wanted to know what kind of positive impact that had on your career. How does that affect how you now hire and how you do training at TP, for example, whether you now hire apprentices because of that, and if there's any benefits to kind of going down the more hands-on route.
Yeah, obviously, probably I would say one of my favorite questions for today, and I think there's pros and cons to it. I'll probably cover both, but for me, I would see the traditional route. Obviously, is always a great way to do it, but for me, I think my USP and what I bring to the table, I see that non-traditional route for me as one of my greatest strengths. And so what I mean with that is, obviously, when I started out, I didn't start out in practice. I worked my way up from being an AP and AR clerk in South Africa to coming to London and being accounts assistant through to management accountant to finance manager to FC to FD to CFO. And coming through all those roles, I think provides you with a strong operational foundation, but also a clear understanding of how the finance function works in every layer. And I think that gives you practical empathy. So when you introduce new systems or processes, I understand what it means for the team to deliver that on a day-to-day, because I've done those roles. I've been there myself. So for me, I'm hoping when I do that and I put the different views forward, I take into consideration how it was for me when it impacted me during those stages, and then be more realistic and considered when I do so. But that also shapes a little bit of how I build my team. So we always look at talent from no matter where they come from, right? If it's practice trained, non-practice trained, for us is identifying the individuals that has the right energy. First of all, you have to have the energy for it. You have to have an open mind to learn different things. And then at the end of the day, it could be education, traditional way or non-traditional way. For me, personally, the entry levels that we create has been very much apprenticeship led. So my last 3 roles that we created as a junior role coming through the business has all been via apprentices. So what we try to do is bring talent through. Obviously, we sometimes hire externally. So if we bring in management accountants or finance managers, there's qualified accountants, but from a entry level route perspective, we try to bring through apprentices to make sure that we bring talent through the business. We train them up in almost our TP Bennett way. They understand our systems. And for us, that's really important. It obviously provides an opportunity for people to come through. That's not obviously through the degree way or whichever it might be, but gives them the opportunity. But also, no matter which way we bring people through, if it's through apprentices or through external hires, we always look at building our teams, providing opportunity for the teams to grow through that system. And for me, like a great example would be when my finance manager left, probably 3 years ago now, we thought about what the structure of the team would look like. So we brought in a new head of finance at that time. And during that time, my role slightly evolved from a CFO, COO role to be a bit more strategic. And therefore, I wanted to bring someone through to FD. So the head of finance, we elevated the head of finance role to a finance director role. Therefore, providing the opportunity for the head of finance to build the relationship with the board, present to the board, present to the business all financial matters. So I stepped away as CFO. I don't present to the board anymore when it comes to financials. I'm still on the board, but I come to the board as a peer and as a business advisor. And when I then try to raise any financial items, it's more to elevate and make impact on those particular items, and not just so when I would do it as an example would be if there's a key area you need to focus on, that the FD would do the presentation, will will outline the key areas of focus, and might just pull one or two things from that and just ask the board to concentrate and focus on this for the next 6 to 8 weeks, because it's critical for us as we, for example, come to year end. So it's just, again, to elevate the individual, also elevate myself, but also change the way I come across in the board meeting, not to be the finance person, but to come across as a peer in the boardroom as well. But yeah, so a downside to that, just quickly as well, is coming through that system. It also takes a change of mindset, though, because when you come through the detailed work of getting things done, stepping into that leadership role, you also have to change your mindset. It's not about getting things done, closing month end fast. It's more about stepping back, looking at things differently, stepping out of the weeds and the detail. And it's more about forward thinking, strategy, looking at the plan, and how do we add value. And I think that's quite a hard thing to do. I'm still struggling sometimes with that, is getting out of the weeds and focusing where I can add the most value. So it's us shifting away from that, closing the books, working in the business, to be more shaping the business and working on the business. And I've worked through every stage of my career in finance, and that, I feel, provides me with a solid foundation to do so.
Yeah, this is it, and it's amazing. I love seeing large businesses go through that kind of apprenticeship scheme, because I think it's amazing to see businesses give back. And I think as a business, you get so much back for it, right? Because you open the barrier to entry to people that are amazing, but just can't maybe get their foot in the door because they don't have that checkbox. And then it's amazing for you to see, because you can see how quickly that they are molded to your way of doing things, that it's an easier learning curve for both parties. And ultimately, it's easier for both careers, right? And then, like you say, having that FD, then being able to step up a little bit more, it just opens the room for people to grow their career rather than being, pigeonholed for 3-4 years, stuck in the same environment. You can have a bit more of a conveyor belt. It's amazing to see. And I was also going to ask, like, in terms of, you do a lot of hiring, especially when it comes to, like I say, apprentices and getting in more kind of junior roles. Do you think that there should be a shift in skill set required for future CFOs? So if people are thinking about, joining the ranks, maybe becoming a financial controller, joining a large business, like I say, maybe if they're not, Big Four trained, is there anything that they should be focusing on skill set wise to kind of help their barrier to entry?
Yes, also, I think one of the soft factors we talked about earlier as well is critical. Like even in junior roles, like you think about like the architecture and design space, a lot of it is not your technical expertise. So if you're a junior accountant doing billings or working on projects, it's so important to clearly communicate the impact of what you're doing and working with the project managers and the project runners on what the impact is. So I think communication skills is always critical when it comes down to the way you communicate finance to non-finance people. And then obviously, I think one of the more modern things to think about is AI, right? A lot of us are starting to think about how do we utilize AI. A lot of finance teams are starting to experiment and playing around with it, right? So again, when you come into those new roles, it's always good to have a different, slight way of thinking about things. And I think AI, of how you can play around with it and help develop potentially systems that's been going for a long time. For example, our system has been built over a number of years. It's a strong ERP system, but still needs now new enhancements based on AI. And again, if someone comes in with slightly different use cases, and you'll see that a lot of juniors coming through, they're a bit more techie sometimes, or used to playing around with tech. So I think that is probably one of the USPs that they can bring differently these days compared to what it would have been 3, 4, 5 years ago.
That makes sense, yeah. Because I mean, ultimately, if you're, CFO, you may take you maybe a year or two potentially to get your mind around these things. Being a young person, being in finance, it's an amazing skill set to have, because you can come in and make a big impact quite easily using tech or AI and things like that. There's also a couple more questions I wanted to ask you, Cornelis, and I think the most obvious one is the kind of dual role that you have, because in TP Bennett you are both the CFO and the COO. And I think it's a bit more common now that we're starting to see a lot of these dual roles now in 2026 rather than, 5 years ago. And do you feel that's because the CFO role is adapting more into operations just naturally? And if so, what's the kind of advantages that you're seeing having both roles?
Yeah, well, I do think we're seeing it more and more now, right? That CFO, COO role is so emerging as a new trend, especially in professional services. But I think it's because the CFO role is so naturally evolved beyond finance or pure finance. If you look at it today, like finance, operations, technology, people, they aren't separate pillars. They're interconnected systems. So for me, when you scale sustainably, those systems can't operate as silos. They can't be individual things like running by themselves. So a CFO or modern CFO has deeply evolved already for me, because they look at performance, they look at data, they look at systems, risk, compliance, transformation. There's so many things on a CFO's plate already. So stepping into that operations side and looking more at the COO side, it was a natural evolution of what that role would be. Yeah, so I think the benefits comes down to, for me, it's tighter alignment between strategy and execution. Because as a COO, you're very much involved with the board, working on the future strategy. And when it comes to the execution side, and a great example would be the acquisition we did last year in the Middle East. Working on that integration, apart from the initial transaction, looking at the deal structure and the negotiations, everything else, which is very traditionally finance focused. The integration itself, it's all about governance, systems alignment, cultural cohesion, operational efficiencies, but also giving leadership clarity and having the oversight of, I think, both finance and operations. Uh, that just reduces the friction between it almost being disconnected, and ensures that anything that we agree on as a board or as an action is just seamlessly actioned post that as well. So for me, I think one of the things I would say for a role that CFO and CEO, for that to be a success, it does need very strong leadership buy-in. So what I mean with that is the board has to be trusting that individual massively. They have to have clear governance in place. They have to have a defined authority of what they can make decisions on, and then they have to be held accountable. So I think without those elements, the CFO and CEO role doesn't really work, because there have to be that element of trust and buy-in from the leadership team. And it's something that I've been working on for a long time within my role, but also I value trust as almost one of the number one values I work on when I do work with a board. So yeah, in general, I think for me, I think the title is almost secondary: CFO, COO, or CFOO. At the end of the day, I think the purpose is for this role is to drive the business forward, and that interconnectivity between the finance operations, it just creates a more unified leadership model, and especially in a growth phase, I think that cohesion and that collaboration is critical to the success of that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think you mentioned a really interesting point. A key word that stood out for me was oversight, right? Because I think, traditionally you may have someone report to you what's going on in operations, and you're seeing it from a 2D perspective. You're seeing it from a reporting from a screen. And I think it's probably always been the way, but you can't beat being that little bit more hands-on and seeing things firsthand. I'm going to talk in a second about the recent acquisition that you guys did, but you being there on the ground in the Middle East, looking at the operations, seeing the governance, it can only just improve the reporting that you do to the board and see things a bit more hands-on. So I think it's probably always been intertwined, but I think now it's just a bit more on paper that actually, you've got that responsibility. And it is a big responsibility, of course. You get the nail on the head that you have to be trusted to do that, and to do both roles is, of course, always difficult. But I did want to quickly mention about the acquisition side of things, because you said that you did a acquisition recently. Correct me if I'm wrong. You acquired a business called Blue House in the Middle East. So it's a bit of a broad question, but I think when we talk about overseas business strategy, like what are some of the key tips to follow that others can learn from in that process? So, for example, keeping up with, as you mentioned, the overseas regulation, negotiating the right deals, communication across borders. There's so much to think about, and having gone through that journey, what kind of advice and tips can you give to others?
Yeah, I think it's probably twofold a little bit. So I'll probably start off with the softer side first. And I think it's probably almost the most critical part of it. So for me, international expansion has to be intentional, and especially in professional services. What I mean with that is the relationship and the culture really matters. And that's pre and post acquisition. So, for example, like the acquisition we did in the Middle East, the partnership with Blue House has been ongoing for nearly 15 years of collaboration. So the trust existed long before the formal structure. So we worked together on projects. We understood each other's standards, our cultures, and more importantly, when the pressure arose on projects, we understood how the firms reacted to that pressure point as well. So when we formalized the acquisition, it was like, it didn't feel like a takeover or something like that. It felt more like a natural evolution of our relationship and that of a long-standing relationship. And actually, one of the partners, one we've, or the principal that was part of Blue House when we acquired him, actually described it as it was like like that natural evolution. We were engaged for a number of years, and we finally decided to get married. So for us, it was more of a formal relationship, but it's been going on for so long that we've just obviously formally tied it in. So for me, the overseas growth element to it is very much relationship based and values based. So because strategy without trust and connection is just fragile, right? So for the best interest of long-term growth, it's all about that relationship. But coming back to more the harder facts of a transaction, yeah, trust and all the soft factors of relationship is not enough, right? We still need the fundamentals to be right. So if it's governance, visibility on their cash flows, compliance, regulatory compliance, especially in cross-border deals, is vital to the success of any acquisition. So obviously for us, when we looked at the regional differences, especially in the UAE with employment law, tax, especially with the FTA, new tax systems that came in, you have to have the right people around you as well. That was obviously internally having the right people for the acquisition, but also externally. So using the right third-party consultants that can advise you through the deal, but also understands your business and also the business that we acquired. So for us, it was very important to make sure we got the right people to understand both sides of the businesses. And then when we put the structure in place regarding the broader group strategy of what we're trying to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years, is striking that balance between the local expertise, providing them enough agility to make decisions and flexibility, but also giving the central oversight to make sure we are on track from a long-term perspective. So I think that for me is probably the key areas. And then you obviously talked about communication and negotiation. And I think just two quick things for me. Communication is always important, no matter if it's local teams or international teams. But I think it's really important when it comes cross-border, right? And I think it comes down to clarity beats complexity here. Keep it as simple, as clear as possible. Keep the information transparent. Keep the reporting lines transparent as well, and keep the financial metrics and KPIs consistent. So everyone's working towards the same type of targets, metrics, etc., which means it just creates a lot of clarity moving forward. And the last point I'm going to raise on this one is probably on the negotiation. And I find this actually really interesting because when I did my MBA as well, it's something I've used during this transaction. And it stuck with me when our lecturer back in the day said this, but it was very much a good negotiation is one where both parties leave slightly unhappy. So basically what I mean with that, the objective is to create the win-win scenario for both. What you don't want to create is where, for example, we as the acquirer go in, you purchase the business and you get a great deal for us, but the relationship post-acquisition is down the drain. So it's very much creating a relationship where everyone feels that there's a win from the deal. And then post-acquisition, we continue working together post, obviously the SPA documentations and everything else, and working on that relationship and driving the growth in that region. But if you didn't have a win-win situation, there's always a little bit of, I think, hesitation about moving forward because you felt like you were almost ripped off type of thing. So for me, so that's always been a very interesting thing when I look at negotiations. So in summary, for me, I think when you look at this, it's very much be intentional when you do an acquisition, especially abroad. Make sure the structure is there, but build trust before you have that structure. Ensure your values align. And then obviously apart from the regulatory elements, make sure you communicate as clearly as possible, but protect that long-term relationship. So when you do the negotiation, it's all about the long-term relationship and it's not just about the short-term deal.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense, and I think it's a little bit unique in the fact that you didn't just come in and find Blue House and wanted to buy them. I think you also had that previous relationship, so you want both sides to win. But I think it's interesting that there's people might forget that there's also a post life after the deal's been done. So like you say, if one party wins as the acquirer and there's a little bit of a sour taste in the mouth of the company that's been purchased, there's still another 5 or 10 years possibly of working together. So you need to make sure that there's, both parties are super happy to make it work, of course, right? And just quickly as well, you did mention about, communication being very important. Now it's quite easy in today's world where, can very easily, send a WhatsApp, there's Slacks, there's Zoom calls. When we're talking about communicating with the Middle East, or anywhere in the world, to be fair, how do you kind of set up your communication channel, if you don't mind me asking? Do you have Slack available? Is it a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of WhatsApps or reporting? What's the way that you like to communicate with your overseas teams? Because I think it's important.
Yeah, so it's still very much a mixed bag. Obviously, the Middle East is a bit more WhatsApp orientated. So when I speak to the partner, it's largely on WhatsApps. It's either voice memos, etc., because it's fast. You can get your comms across. But when it comes to the Teams itself, we obviously do use Teams as our main platform within the business. So most of our correspondence within the Teams is just in Teams is on Teams. But we very much value that. So like I don't run the weekly meetings from a finance perspective. It's done by our finance director. We have weekly meetings on every Wednesday at 12:30 UK time, where the global team will join the finance call, and it's all just about connecting what's going on in the region, what's going on from a project perspective. So it's making sure there's regular interaction and video calls as well, so we can see everyone across the globe. And I think we all have different ways of communicating, if it's emails, Teams, but it's making sure that you still have that face-to-face interaction. If people aren't even here, you still have those video calls, you still have those group calls, just to create that connectivity. Like I said earlier, connection creates commitment. Make sure you create that connection all the time, build those relationships, because that's what people are here for. We're doing a job, we want to do the job well. We're also here to enjoy the environments and the people we work with.
That's it. Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think it's awesome that you get to have the opportunity to see people. So having that mixture of WhatsApp and Teams, I guess you can feel connected even though you're not always in person, which is amazing. And just to finish things off, Cornelis, I always like to finish off on a bit of a quick fire round. So I'm just going to fire off a couple of questions. And the first one is, what's the first metric that you look at every morning?
Yeah, so that's probably going to be, I think, a very similar one to a lot of people in the business world. I would say it's cash. It's the lifeblood of any firm, right? So it's something that I focus on. And as the saying goes, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. So cash provides you with that resilience, but more importantly, the cash provides you with options. And I think in the day and age we're in now, with all the volatility in the regions, if you have optionality, it really matters. If it's options to react due to circumstances, or if it is to invest in future opportunities. I do think cash and making sure the business has sufficient cash is the most critical part. And that's why that's one of the main metrics I would look at every day.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. And secondly, which technology do you think will transform the design industry next in 2026?
So I think that probably technology is probably already here. But for me, it would be AI, but I think it's the integration of data and AI into a connected platform. And so what I mean with that is not using AI as a standalone tool, or the great data we hold on our ERP systems or our intranets, etc. It's very much linking our systems when it comes to design, sustainability, modeling, cost data, client insights, all in real time. So for me, it's connecting the dots better by using AI. And I think the firms that combine creativity, which is obviously the lifeblood of what we do, with intelligent data insights, is the ones that will create that competitive advantage, but also potentially redefine the industry moving forward.
So it's there about to fill in those data gaps quicker using AI rather than being a manual task. And you've kind of beat me to it already. My third question was going to be AI in architecture. Does it have its place? I think you've kind of answered that. But if there's anything else that you wanted to add on the last quick point on AI.
Yeah, so like I said, but I do think it's important in the industry. It's important to any industry these days, but I do think it's not a replacement of architecture and design. It's very much an amplifier. So what I mean with that is, if you look at concept exploration and doing loads of concept models, doing repetitive processes or scenario modeling, whatever it might be, there's an opportunity to enhance what we do as a business. But within design, and probably most firms, it's still, even though it's been out there for a while, it's still early days. There's a lot of exploring that we're doing. There's a lot of testing and investing that we're doing, but there's also risks associated with open source platforms. So at the same time, when we're looking at the opportunities, we're also looking at the potential risks around data security, intellectual property, or even client confidentiality, right? So, but what we do see is things like Midjourney, Creo AI, obviously like in our space, firms that work with that and with clear governance and guardrails have an opportunity to use those tools to free up designers to focus on the judgments of what they're good at, elements of empathy around their design, and the vision of what they see the projects looking like, things where AI can't add or replicate the human activity. So I think it's making sure that we just utilize that as a tool to elevate what we do. But on top of that, we've, for example, as a business, have been doing a lot of AI hackathons or experimentation in the back end. We developed 2 to 3 years ago a computational design team focusing very much on digital innovation, including AI. So it looks at advanced tools, algorithms, data-driven methods to focus around how buildings and environments are conceived, analyzed, and delivered. So it's been going on for a number of years. It's just using the great tools we have now. But what I don't see is it diluting our design, or our creativity. It's more about elevating that and pushing it to the next level, allowing the human element of design to thrive moving forward.
That makes sense, yeah. Well, especially when you've got a design team that are doing so much work that AI, like you said, can just fill in the gaps so they can be 100% more effective. I think that's amazing. Cornelis, I have to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for joining the show today. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure the viewers are going to learn a lot from some of the conversations that we've had today. If anyone does want to reach out to you and find out a little bit more about TP Bennett, what you guys have to offer, or just reach out to you personally, what's the best way for them to get in contact, whether that be email or LinkedIn?
Yeah, I would just say reach out to LinkedIn directly. It's probably the best way to get through to me. Emails, there's always a lot of emails coming through. So I think LinkedIn is the best approach. And also just want to thank you as well, Zach, for obviously having me on. It was a great conversation. And also I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thank you.
Perfect. No, thank you so much for that. We'll leave that be. Thank you so much for your time, Cornelis, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.